There's a great saying I learned in art therapy, which is regression in service of the ego. And all movements forward in art practices of all kinds require regression. They require that we slow down, that we do things in clunky ways. If you're a dancer, no one learns a new dance move and just steps into its elegance immediately. They slow down, they regress the movements, they learn the steps, and then integrate that. So I think the same thing with art making. Every new step in art making requires a regression, right? A kind of clunkiness to the practice. Yeah.
This is Platemark. My name is Ann Schaefer, and I'm your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. And in Series 3 of Platemark, we are interviewing the really interesting characters and luminaries of the print ecosystem. That means we're interviewing artists, master printers, print publishers, curators, writers, scholars, art historians, maybe even conservators. Today, I'm introducing you to somebody who is not a printmaker as his primary mode of working, but that points to something that I like to say a lot, which is that many people who work in print work in other media as well, painting, sculpture, what have you, and that printmaking is intertwined with that practice in a way that informs it, and painting and whatever mode those artists are working in will inform the printmaking, so that it shouldn't be held off to the side as some weird technical esoteric wizardry or something, but that it's something that can really help inform your work and your thinking about your work. Dave Cloutier is a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. He has recently opened a one-room schoolhouse, as he likes to call it, an art studio, where he is offering classes, mentorships, critique sessions, and residencies. He has 3 artist studios available for second career artists, people who maybe no longer have access to equipment in studios, who have been busy with careers or parenthood or whatever else. And he offers not only the equipment and full access to it, the equipment and the space, but also to himself. He is a very deep thinker. He brings a lot of heart and soul to his practice and hopes to do the same for you. He has some words of wisdom that he likes to impart to his students. You'll hear him talk about that, and also you'll hear what his thinking is on being under the bright light of Grace Hardigan, who was his professor at the Hoffberger School of Painting when he was in graduate school at MICA. Okay, I have 3 points of housekeeping to get through before we start listening to our conversation with Dave. First, I always want to, and sometimes forget, to make clear my positionality. I identify as a cis het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Number 2, there is on the platemarkpodcast.com webpage a support and donate button across the top menu bar, which will take you to 2 selections. The support on Anchor button will take you to a page where you can sign on to become a monthly donor of $5. The Buy Me a Coffee button will take you to a page where you can make a one-time donation. It is set at $50, but there's a little button right under that amount that says change amount, so you can give me $1 if you want. It takes a lot to get this podcast done, and your support is much appreciated. The third point of housekeeping is about the images that you will hear Dave mention in our talk. Links to those will be in the show notes over at platemarkpodcast.com. Give it a listen and let us know what you think. Tell a friend about us. That's our call to action. Tell somebody about us. Okay, buckle up. Here we go. Today I'm delighted to talk to Dave Cloutier, who is a Baltimore artist, professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, but who has a special new project that I wanted to talk to him about and share with our listeners. So, Dave, tell us your name, where you are, and what you're doing.
Hi, I'm Dave Cloutier. I'm sole proprietor and founder of Center Arts and Studios, which is a educational and research space in the Mills Center in Hamden. And that's where we're recording from. We're in the library, actually, right now, recording from the library at Center Arts and Studios.
So describe the space and then what the plan is, the program.
So the program is a one-room schoolhouse. So there's an educational space, which includes a 52 by 32 inch Charles brand etching press, which is new to me, brought up from North Carolina with True Ludwig, who was the force behind that activity.
The broker.
Thank you, True. And shout out to True right now. It's like none of this would be happening without his support. Yeah, I say that with a tear in my eye. Like I owe so much to True. Thank you, True.
And also?
A 16 by 32 inch Charles brand etching press that I've had for years and years. So we have these two presses and they anchor the program. I'm very much into monoprinting. I've been monoprinting for years, and most of my personal work now involves an interaction between painting and monoprinting, and especially in the large scale pieces, which are 14 or 15 feet across.
What?
Yeah, they're really.
I don't think I've ever seen the big ones.
They're really big. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they're actually too big for this space. So the galleries at MICA handle them okay, but the monoprints are multi-plate figures. So the figures will be life-size, like life-size monoprinted figures on multiple plates. And so one of the things I'm very excited about with the new Charles brand press is actually pushing that medium even further into size. Like how big a monoprint can we make as a combined plate print? So that's the basis of the program. But the monoprint itself is, in my opinion, the premier research tool for discovering new ideas and new ways of doing things or new content in work. It's a fantastic tool for discovery, that process.
Good way for painters to get in.
Yeah, for painters, artists of any kind. So right now at the center, there's people with a background in painting working here. There's a landscape designer who's working here. And then there's a architectural designer who does artwork, who's also working here. And they're all interacting with the monoprint process, the drawing process, color. We're starting to go into collagraphs and starting to mess with collagraphs. So, but it's all research. It's all discovery based. And then how that interacts with the work, that's what we support too going further as well. So we have an active research program going on. And then upstairs in the mezzanine, we have 3 studio spaces that are a residency program. And so the idea being come have a space upstairs, 24-hour access, and you get what I consider graduate level education and attention from both myself and visiting artists here at Center Arts. And that is like in place to jumpstart, continue, expand what you're doing in your practice.
So you're targeting post-school
artists. Yeah. So it's not, I don't want to like to say what things are not, but we're not just a skills-based program here. It's not to come and learn a new skill. Although I'll teach you how to do a monoprint. It takes like 10 minutes, right? Minutes to learn, a lifetime to work on. So yeah, monotypes are really fast to learn. It's like easy. No, it's definitely in the sense of a place to discover and grow and be supported in that process. That is our main mission. And especially for artists who, like our second career artists, have a studio practice on your own, and don't have a community to engage with. So we have a monthly critique group. We've had our first one last month, and we're having a second one coming up in September. Fantastic. Yeah. We meet at 10 in the morning and just start talking art all day long. So really, really exciting work to do, really in depth. And the philosophy too within the critiquing is we're not an academy. There's no perfection outside of the work. So we're very much engaged in the activity of the work itself. What is the inherent value of the object or image being made? That's the approach to the critique. What does the image itself call to the artist or offer the artist? And the critique group is a way of getting many eyes and many thoughts on the image and on the object to understand what it's saying and what it's. Yeah.
Is the goal of critique? I mean, sometimes it's make it better, but sometimes is it a way to understand what you might not know other people will see in your work? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's amazing.
But you can't control it.
Yeah, I think Agnes Martin said it's amazing how little we know about our own work, right?
That's perfect.
right? It's true. It's like our best work is mysterious and distant from us. Like we don't really understand it. And I know every artist listening to this right now knows it's like you're all going like, and you're a little bit frightened by that because, we don't, it's almost impossible to describe how we did our best work. We don't remember how we did it.
Oh.
You know?
Wow, is that right?
Yeah. Athletes are the same way. You know, it's like if you ask somebody how they did something as an athlete, they can't describe it because it's a part of the being or a part of the mind that is beyond our verbal.
You go to a different place when you're in the moment.
Yeah, somebody call it the zone or whatever, but it's like, you know, I always think of, you know, artists, there's our normal selves, right? Our normal selves, right? And then there's the artist part of ourselves that is utilizing a vast amount of what is inside of us to bring the work forth. And that's also an interaction with medium and an interaction with place and an interaction with objectness and image. All those things are going on, and it's highly, highly complex and very difficult to describe, impossible to catch in the moment. So, you know, there's an idea that we actually do things ahead of knowing what they are verbally. We understand things through activity of our bodies, and then we go back and we understand it verbally afterwards.
Maybe 15 years later.
Maybe 15 years later. Yeah, exactly.
I talked to so many artists who are like, well, that's what I was doing.
Yeah. And so the critique group deeply honors that aspect of art making. It isn't about fixing something. It's about understanding something. Because, you know, inevitably, and this is, again, like kind of on what we don't do. It's like we don't go in and say, well, if you did this, this, and this, it would get better. Because it's like, that's just having somebody do work the way I would do it, you know? I don't want them doing the work the way Dave would do it, God forbid, right? What's much more useful to the artist is when, as fellow artists come in and are vulnerable, are able to be affected by the work and open to the work, right? Then we reflect back on how we're being affected by the work. And so the work begins to speak through everybody present in the critique, and then the artist begins to hear what their work is doing as well in a different way. It can be really intensely profound in terms of understanding yourself and what the work is saying back to us as artists. Like, what is this? I made this thing now. What is it saying back to me? How is it talking to me as the artist? And our best work is often the most mysterious to us, you know, and is slightly outside of actually our ever really knowing its full content. I use this term a lot. Artwork, in my opinion, the most useful artwork to us, or the most profound, is irreducible.
What?
Yeah, work is irreducible. And the greatest of artworks are totally irreducible. There is never a single meaning you can reduce it down to. So all of the great pieces, all of the greatest prints you post, right?
Yeah.
The great ones are irreducible. We can go back to them again and again and again throughout an entire lifetime and engage in them and never get to the end of what its meanings are. There's always another meaning within that irreducibility. I'm always searching for the irreducibility of something. Like, I'm always looking for that work that leads and opens again and opens to another meaning. I guess the most universal of that are dreams, like the dreams that we hold from childhood. We all have dreams that we remember from childhood, right? And
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's nuts, really.
But those dreams are so important to us, and they are irreducible. We go back to them again and again in our memory because they hold yet another meaning, right? As we get older, they hold, right? You were saying artists like, 15 years ago I did this, and now I know why I did this, you know? So that irreducibility is also the vulnerability and the honoring of the irreducibility of artwork. Vulnerable to the artwork and acknowledging its irreducibility are the two aspects of great critiquing or useful critiquing to artists and to each other.
The corollary of that to me is, and what I always tell artists is, I want you to reduce the elements down to say more with less. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, don't give me 5 ways to say that your parents were X, Y, and Z. Like,
Yeah.
give me 1.
Yeah. A lot of my own work is out of mythology. So I'm like working out of Homer, or I'm working out of Old Testament stories. I do a lot of work out of Adam and Eve, or the Annunciation, New Testament, like the Annunciation. Lots of my work is kind of from that basis of it. And I feel like these great narratives or these great mythologies, you could take any aspect, any one element, and speak about the entire narrative through one element. So we could take the apple, we could take Eve's apple, and just make images of the apple and speak about all of the meaning of that narrative and all of its implications and all of its politics and all of its, like we could go with it, right? But simply by holding the apple within an image, all that can happen. So,
are you Catholic?
Well, in my history, yes, I am Catholic.
You're a recovering Catholic.
Well, that's another story. But yes, I am actually Catholic by heritage.
Yeah.
Yeah. The activity of these images within, and elements within artworks, right? Like you're talking about reducing to one thing. I think the one thing can talk about everything.
Right.
Again, there's that irreducibility.
Yeah.
Like you can take an image set or a narrative set and reduce it down to one bit, but even that one bit opens up to all the other meanings within.
I like it. I'm adding it to my critique,
my
critique script.
No, it's really, it's so much the basis of what this place is and what the thinking of this place is. It's also based in, and I've been talking more about this lately, and I don't know why it's so important right now, but this idea of unconditional positive regard for the artist and the process and the image and what you're being called to do. And that is in discrete and definitive opposition to the way the art market is operating now in our world, which is, in my opinion, out of hand. Like it's lost its way,
Sure.
And we're both nodding and like looking down at this moment, right? Because it's so overwhelming.
Well, I feel like the market shouldn't have anything to do with the creators.
And yet it does. It's infiltrated deep into academia, down to the very first day students show up and are expecting return on investment in academia.
But the way you're talking about what your through line is, it requires maturity.
Yeah. It's very difficult to do and requires that I take my personal biases, my personal likes, and I put them all aside. And what is the work I'm dealing with right in front of me?
Right.
What is the meaning of this work? Like, how is it, again, permeability to the work. Like, can I be vulnerable to it? Can I allow it to affect me? And that's really challenging. It's a practice. Mm-hmm. And it's what I think is one of the most valuable practices to have as an artist. It opens up the entire art world to us in that way as well. For better or worse, right? Because when you're open to everything affects us, and it requires a bit of strength, right?
You have to be able to protect yourself a bit.
A little bit, yeah. So, or also resist hype. What should be good. Oh, this is said to be good. Yes. Is this good? I don't know.
Who gets to decide?
Who gets to decide whether it's good or not? So.
We've chatted before. We're friends.
Yeah.
And I happen to know that you have a background in art therapy, which your entire monologue so far has felt very, at least referential. To that part of you.
No, the art therapy training, I went to UArts in Philadelphia. It was PCA back then, but it switched over to University of the Arts, and they had, I don't know if they still do, a wonderful program in art therapy as an undergraduate. And it fed into a master's program at Hahnemann Hospital, which was the first master's in art therapy in the country, I believe. Philly has a really strong art therapy vibe to it, and it's very image-oriented. Very different than coming from my New England, Massachusetts, fear of the graven image upbringing, right? Where you come to Philadelphia and it's rich with like Eakins and, this technical understanding. It's a rich history of the image My entire color palette changed when I moved from Worcester, Mass to Philadelphia, PA. Like, the art therapy really brought me into that thinking originally, and then I do a lot of work, and I've done a lot of studying of archetypal psychology, which is Jungian psychology kind of updated. Now I've been doing a lot of work in thinking about ecological systems in terms of teaching and thinking about making work, which really privileges this part of the brain that is non-conscious or pre-conscious. How do we make the decisions we make in terms of engaging a broader relational understanding of making artwork as opposed to an object-oriented way of making artwork? So not so much focused on the object, but focused on the object is manifested by the field it occupies.
Oh gosh.
That's the kind of technical approach to thinking. And in terms of working with younger students, right? It's we're talking about college age students.
Well, you teach at MICA.
Because I teach at MICA,
right.
Yeah, and I work in undergrad, and I teach grad students too. Step number one is to make an image that is no longer a picture of an object, but on the picture plane, like let's say a drawing, is a relationship across the entire picture plane of all elements of the picture plane. So, if you're drawing a coffee cup, right, the coffee cup doesn't exist on its own. The coffee cup exists in relation to everything that is surrounding it within the image. And that thinking is purely relational. Everything relates to everything else. It's a matrix existing within the constantly reoccurring now of the image, right? It's what makes art so great, right?
All right.
But that thinking, especially for young adults, is the first step into, oh, I am not an isolated individual. I'm actually part of everything that is going on, that I am a relational being as opposed to single individual. So it helps students going from separation and individuation as teenagers, where you have to choose a path and say, all right, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing, right? A kind of rigidity our minds need to develop, and moving into a much more, who am I in relation now to my peers, other artists, society, globalization, et cetera, these really big questions. It's the first step into that.
You're teaching citizenship, really.
Yeah, I truly believe that. Like, that to understand relational thinking within artwork is to begin to understand you're relating to everybody on the planet. I know it sounds a little maybe far-fetched, but I actually totally think that that is step one.
Yeah.
That if you can create a relational object, you can understand your relation to other beings in the world and your responsibility for that as well. So
it could feel to someone that you're trying to back down ego? Which
yeah.
you need as an artist.
Yeah, you do. Ego's important. I think every artist who comes in here into Center Arts, right, is called to be here. And I think every artist wants to see something they haven't seen yet, and they know is kind of in there. It's always hovering just on the edge of our consciousness, right? This thing they want to see, but you haven't seen it yet. I always think of, I guess it was Bill Gates who invented the first, who made the first laptop computer? Was that Bill? They built this computer, right? It's like, oh, look at that, right? And it's like, well, what are you going to do with it? I don't know. But they built the thing because they knew it would have use. In some way, artists, I think, gain a lot of, quote, skills because they know they're going to be useful for something. There's artists I've seen who have worked almost an entire lifetime and haven't really found the content yet that they want their work to say, but have developed tremendous skills of depiction or with materials, right? They haven't quite figured out what they want to say because it isn't quite there yet. And then once they figure out what the work wants, what it wants to begin to talk about, all of those skills come to bear. And I think that I'm seeing within this practice, what I'm doing here, those are kind of the artists I've been working with. Artists who have a tremendous lifetime of development of skills. They're starting to tip into what the work wants. And it's really great to have other artists around you at that time because they can often say things about your work that are out of our habits of a lifetime are harder to get to when new work begins to appear for itself. I feel like I strayed from your question. Ego, you were talking about ego. Yeah, and ego is, there's a great saying I learned in art therapy, which is regression in service of the ego. And all movements forward in art practices of all kinds require regression. They require that we slow down, that we do things in clunky ways. If you're a dancer, no one learns a new dance move and just steps into its elegance immediately. They slow down, they regress the movements, they learn the steps, and then integrate that and begin to internalize it, and it begins to come out again in a different way. So I think the same thing with art making. Every new step in art making requires a regression, right? A kind of clunkiness to the practice.
And practice, right?
Yeah. And so the ego part of that, right, is like, my ego is able to handle this clunky art I'm making now because I know in the future it will get better, right? It will begin to evolve again. And sometimes that's out of habit, but also it's fearful. When we step into a new direction, it's all of a sudden, this sucks. It's like awful, right? And you have to be strong enough to deal with that. It's deeply challenging. It's probably the most frightening part of the process, is the working in the unknown. So it requires some ego strength in doing that. It's like, it's okay. I can handle this. I can work in the unknown. And all the artists listening to this right now are like, yeah. Because it feels safe to stay within what we know, but then the work won't allow it. And it becomes boring, or it becomes disorganized, or it becomes repetitive, which is perhaps the worst.
Yeah, the repetition thing is really a problem, because artists who are deeply involved in the market, they're known for A, and people want A, and they don't want B, or Z, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, there is repetition is necessary.
Right. Sure.
I do a lot of my research through repetition. So if I have an image that I've discovered through drawing, let's say, or through making monoprints, or wherever I discover that, I will repeat that image hundreds of times sometimes in order to just know what it is. And I'll do it in monoprint, or I'll do it in Sharpie, or I'll do it in pencil, or I'll do it in charcoal, or I'll do it in sand, or I'll do it in clay, or I'll do it on sticky notes. I'm like notorious for sticky notes. That repetition's really important because it allows things to break. So it doesn't become precious anymore, and allows things to break within that repetition.
You sound just like Hader. Everyone knows I'm a hater person. I don't know if Dave knows I'm a hater person.
No, I don't know this.
Okay. So there's a well-known print person named Stanley William Hader.
Yeah.
Known as Bill, right?
Yeah.
And he, amongst many other things, subscribed to the surrealist practice of automatic drawing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was all about the Jungian archetype and he, all of that stuff. He would draw and draw and draw and draw and draw, and whatever, if you stacked up each image, figure, whatever, in a pile, the ones that were the tallest, he knew would be relatable across humanity, and
they would be irreducible. That's the irreducible pile.
Exactly. Yeah. He sounds just like him. He would draw in the sand too.
Yeah. That's the Jungian kind of way.
Yeah.
It's the respect for the activity of the image itself. The image becomes its own force within the practice.
Well, and it's respecting your own mind.
Yeah. So repetition's interesting. There's a desire for like a commodification of an image through repeating its motif, and it becomes it becomes a commodity in that way. I don't want to use this time to talk about that because that's like a different conversation. So, but then there's like repetition within practices, and I deeply admire many practices that are purely repetitive in what they do. You mentioned Agnes Martin. There's an artist, repetitive grid things, but then have all this variation and nuance and subtlety within them. They're amazing.
That's sort of the challenge of minimalism, right? Is
to
get that range.
So yeah, there is no right way. Again, you hear within my stuttering here, is the respect for the process and the respect for what is going on within the image itself. That's not for me to judge.
Sure.
It is. That's the calling of the unique calling of each artist to what their practice is.
Do young artists need to be taught how to listen to themselves? Do you know what I mean?
I think every young artist that I work with and every mature artist I work with is there for a reason. And I think the first step for young artists is to push through or cut through or put aside or just kind of sideline the external reasons for being there, right? Jobs, skill training, they're all neoliberal deals, right? And kind of get at what made you go through all the crap you have to go through to get to this school, and your portfolio and the application process. Because let me tell you, people who are not artists are not going to go through that. Like, they are just not going to do it, because it's you have to want to be there. Lots of people go to college and they don't really know. They apply and they just go and they're like, no, it's like, yeah. And I think in some ways artists need to do that more. They need to apply for art school, they need to get into school, and they show up and they're like, what are you here for? If they think they know, it actually limits really what the calling may be within them. Same thing here. Artists show up here and I'll look at their past work. I'm like, okay, so where are we going to go from here? And then we begin to work on things together. Or they'll try out a new process, or we'll start drawing. This drawing is the basis of everything. Sure. But it's always getting at what the calling is. What does the work itself want? Like, what is this work bringing you here for? And you have to make the work to find that out, right. To know through doing.
Right.
And so working with young artists, I often tell students who are in their first semester that you are here to begin to figure out how your mind works and what it likes to do. And the only way to find out how your mind works and what it likes is to make work and figure out how your mind works by making work that talks back to you. And you begin to understand, oh, this is how my mind works. I think the first year should be a process of discovering yourself through the process of making all different kinds of artwork and discovering how your mind works, what you care about through the making of the artwork. Put aside everything else and figure out how you work.
I've always said that artists have a different kind of brain, which I still believe. We just approach problems differently, but the way you're talking, it's about self-actualization almost. Like you're
very much so.
Yeah.
Actually, I use that term.
Yeah.
Like, my goal is to create self-actualized, self-perpetuating, self-educating artists. I don't. I'll say this right. I don't want to talk about my teaching at MICA, right? But I have told students, I'm not here to make you a star of MICA, right? You can become a star very easily. There's ways to become that. Institutions know what they like. That's not my job. My job is to have you walk out of my classroom as a self-actualized artist at best, along with a really heavy toolbox of ways of getting to that self-actualization. I want you to come out with a solid toolbox of all sorts of ways and approaches and thoughts and strategies for getting at what you want to get at. So oftentimes I've said, I teach for 20 years after students graduate. I want to be in their heads. and I have to say that I have
succeeded?
Indeed, had students contact me years later and say, Dave, you're still in there. Because all my teachers are still in there. Grace Hardigan's in there. Doris Staffel's in there from UArts. Boris Putterman is in there. And these people have all passed on. But they live in me, and I teach through them every time I teach. They are all coming through me. It's a kind of life after death. It's really wonderful.
I think you might be a unicorn, Dave.
You've said that.
I still believe it.
Okay. I think the effort it took to build this school that we're sitting in right now, it doesn't come out of nowhere. You've really got to want to do this and be called to do it, to make it happen. And it's slightly, I'm talking about people who are beyond me now, beyond us. The calling to make this space is a bit beyond me. And every time I work with a student in here, I'm reminded, oh, this is why I went through this like going on 2-year process to build the school and to bring the tools in here and to create space for artists to work. It's kind of beyond me. It is slightly mysterious in terms of what I'm doing. And it's really deeply satisfying. You know, it is wonderful when we're all in here working and doing it. It's great. And I can't wait to see who shows up. You know, every time I get a new student in, it's fascinating. Because everyone, especially as we get older, the stories are so rich. Like there's so much depth in the stories of people. It's remarkable how much depth there is.
Life experience.
Yeah. And I love working with young students too, because they're getting at the basic calling, that initial glimmer of the calling. But then, you know, when somebody's been working for 10, 20, 30, 40 years at their artwork, at that depth, immediately opens to such quality of the practice. It's really wonderful. It's really exciting. Any move, any change in direction, any new course is bolstered by just a wealth of understanding of the self. My job is to open that up and let that begin to happen. That's my job as quote unquote teacher.
Right.
I'm more of a facilitator than a teacher.
But at Center Arts and Studio, so there's basically a studio classroom situation that is malleable.
Yeah, we offer classes
Right.
So in September we're offering we're going to make big monoprints. I'm cutting up big pieces of plexiglass. We're going to make some big prints. You know, so it's big prints. Let's print big. It's called Go Big, right? And it's just like I want to see how big prints we can make.
Yeah.
You know. So, and that's, you know, a materials approach to it, right? And a process approach to it. So we offer that.
And then there's the critique club.
Yeah, the critique group.
Sunday group. And then you have these residencies upstairs. And if people are interested, it's a pretty free-flowing. There's not like we start September 1 and we end May 15.
Yeah.
It's very malleable.
Yeah, it's very much it's set up for people who have jobs, right? Who are working regular full-time jobs, second career artists, you know. The classes are all going to be offered in the evenings, except for critique groups on the weekends. I've been doing studio visits outside of the center with artists, visiting and critiquing with artists outside of the center. We're going to have guest artists coming in to do some lectures and talk about their work.
And teaching the classes too, right? It's not all you teaching.
Yeah, my next step is to get other people to come in and teach in the facility too, and to use the tools here, because we can't all be about me. I'm only one person. I only have so much time in my life. So, oh my God.
You don't want it to be the cult of Dave.
No cult of Dave. No, no.
But you have definitely a very strong philosophy about how this all works, which might require training people in this method of yours, which I think is.
It's interesting in that regard. My sense is everyone I've been working with is, it's almost like a relief, like a shedding of past pressures on themselves and saying, oh, thank you. Now I can start working on my work. It's really, I have one student who did an entire undergraduate in Virginia in fine art and just kept the pressure that he had in school on him throughout his practice going forward. I could never let it go, what the work, quote unquote, should look like, as opposed to following what the work wanted to be. And so it's always held at a certain level within the making, not because of his skill, it's like enormous skill, but because of thinking of what the work should look like, as opposed to following what the work wants to be. So it's, when we're working as object-oriented thinking, the object should look a certain way. It should have these qualities based on the market or based on, other people's practices, right? The work progresses very slowly. The second it moves into its own way of being, it advances very, very quickly. Like it's an amazing shift in that expansion of the practice. Once it moves away from object orientation to field orientation, that's the shift. It's no longer about how to make an object or a picture of something, but how to make an image as an object, a full interrelational object with itself. Like, that's technically what it's happening, but it's psychologically, it opens up to just multifolate expansion of practices. This sounds like I'm talking art theory in a way, but that's the approach.
All right. There's some tipping point in growth as an artist where you've been told that you are good at rendering things, and it's not till some undetermined point where you can cross over into this kind of psychological relationship with your
it takes effort, and you gotta want it. It takes trust, and I think it takes support too. I've been very, very lucky in the faculty that have supported me in my educational career. Grace Hardigan being the pinnacle of the people I worked with.
What was she like to work with?
Oh my God, Grace! Really, Grace was diamond hard.
Oh.
We're talking the hardest, most direct critique I've ever received in my life.
Brutal.
A shockingly precise eye.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I missed nothing.
Oh.
Yeah. At the same time.
In a positive, but not
in a positive way. No, Grace was hard on people.
Yeah.
And I feared Grace. I feared this 80-something-year-old woman. I could hear her coming down the hall, and I could tell by her gait whether I was in for it or not. You know? I was like, oh dear. Grace was very, what's the term? There was no in-between with her. It was always for the work. Everything was about the work. And, you know, I'll be self-revelatory here about Grace. Grace one time said to me, and it was towards the end of my second year, she was looking at my work, and she said something that took another 10 years for me to process. She said to me, Dave, your biggest problem is with your work is that you want to be loved. Right? So I'm getting a little teary talking about this, right? And she was right. At that point in my life, I was trying to make artwork that people would love me because they loved the work, right? And it took another 10, almost 15 years to begin to make work. Excuse my language, doesn't give a shit whether you like me or not. You can bleep that out. Doesn't care. Doesn't fucking care whether you like me or not. In fact, my work now, it doesn't care if I like it or not. I'm making work now, and I think Grace would approve, that I don't like. That's how I look at my own work. I don't really like this, but it's really good art. Right? And I owe that to Grace, that I'm now able to make work that is beyond whether or not even I like it, but this is what the work itself wants to be, beyond what I think about it. I understand how to make paintings as objects, right? But psychologically, I'm attached to them. And letting the work really separate from me and having its own thought on its own, completely independent of me. Every piece of work I make now has to have that. If it's still attached to me, I'm not satisfied with it. It has to actually leave me completely, which allows for work to be made that I actually don't like.
Right.
It's doing exactly what it wants to be doing. So that's a troubling relationship with artwork, that my own personal artwork that I'm having right now.
It's interesting. We've, in other episodes, talked about the relationship that artists have with the work, and the work itself as this midline, and after you're done and release it into the world, that there's this whole other ecosystem of people like me, the curator. Many of whom don't care who you are, really. I mean, they can say, oh, he went to here, here, and here, and shows here, here, and here.
Yeah.
But they don't ever know you.
Some people have passed on, right? It's like we can never meet them, you know. Even then, would it matter, you know?
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I suffer from the narcissism. I want people to like me too. Like it's a problem.
It's nice to be liked, you know. It's like...
But with the art, it's so interesting because once it's out of your hands, it's really distanced from the maker.
Yeah, that and Anne is doing this great thing. It's like you're separating your hands further away. I actually, that motion, when I'm working on my work, I feel that with the work.
Oh, interesting.
I know I actually do it. When it reaches the point that it is done, it leaves me and goes away from me. Work that is not
Done is just stacked
it's just
up
still there, and there it is, like all stacked up because it's still connected with me, and so I have to walk around with it. It's like the other work. I'm like, yeah. No, I think that is 100% spot on with that thought. The work is separate from us. This loops back to the beginning of our discussion about how the work talks back to the artist, and to make work that does that, make work that is separate from us and yet tells us about ourselves in some way, or speaks to us about issues or thoughts or ways of being that are connected to us yet separate from us profoundly. And that work that becomes separate from us is the irreducible work. Because when it becomes autonomous from us and is no longer connected to our finite thought of what it should be, but has its own independent thought, that's the irreducible work. Okay. That's the work that will live and have endless meaning within it, because it's an independent being. Right? It's an independent entity from us.
That's some higher order.
But this is what I'm saying. This is like real, though. This is real. It's why museums exist. Museums are insane, right? You're like, right. We've talked about this. The Met, at any given point, I know there's like a ton of people sitting on the steps of the Met right now. Millions of people. That's just one museum, right? You see that
everything in there is an autonomous work of art that does the irreducible.
No, but it's worth it for the ones that are.
Okay.
It's worth it for the ones that are. And it's
It'd be interesting to have you design a fictitious tour through your favorite autonomous works.
Yeah. What are the autonomous works?
Yeah,
I have my artists, right?
My favorite? Yeah.
My top artists are Fra Angelico, Cy Twomley, Philip Guston, Paula Rigo.
Oh, I love her.
Right? Like move between those.
Angelico.
Oh, Fra Angelico, I owe so much to Fra Angelico.
Picturing an Annunciation.
Yeah. No, Fra Angelico's works are the most direct embodiments of this tipping between what I would call modernist art and pure image, and then something else going on in there.
Your other three artists are all, Fra Angelico was pre-printing, really.
Yeah.
Sort of,
yeah.
I don't think he ever made prints. But Twombly, Guston, Paula Rigo, fine printmakers, all three.
Oh my God, Guston's prints.
Guston's prints, Paula Rigo's etchings, oh my God.
I just like, Twombly, it's just, if I balance Twombly and Fra Angelico with each other, I want to live right in there, between those two artists.
We'll have to talk about Twombly sometime, because he's not on my list, I confess.
Yeah, Twombly just breaks me. I think I learned this idea of being able to talk about everything through any one aspect, like any one image of a narrative, through Twombly's paintings in the Philadelphia Museum when I went to school in Philadelphia. Okay. I owe him that. And then also the idea of irreducibility of object images, especially in his sculptures. They're completely irreducible. Those are my people I go to on a regular basis. And Rigo especially. Rigo, oh my God, I owe her work so much in terms of just the freedom she gives me to follow what I'm doing. Right. So much integrity. Tate has videos of her talking, and every one of the videos, there's a gold nugget in every one of those videos.
Right.
They're
I'll
great.
Post links in the show notes. So, because we're a printmaking podcast.
Oh yeah, we are printmaking.
We're going to circle back around to the two presses you have in the shop. And you're doing colograph and
monotypes, prints, monotypes,
Yeah.
We're going to do some dry points too.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Sometimes I foresee the future of this place, that if somebody wants to come in and do etching and set up the etching process here, I'm like, have at it.
Are the monotypes that you're encouraging your students to embark on here an end point, or are they a process by which to explore further ideas?
I make them sometimes as endpoints, but never specifically as that. They are always process, research, discovery based. If you think about a monotype, right, a monotype has a certain kind of structure to it. It has constraints built into it. the plates are only so big. Even the big plates are only so big. Even if we're making multiple plates, they're only so big, right? So there's a kind of architecture within which the process happens, right? This is why printmaking is such a fantastic thing, right? You're given a constraint of the plate. There's a time constraint of the material of the ink. So it's like painting or more brush and ink. There's a time constraint. You can only work on them so much, and they begin to fall apart. The ink itself, relating to brush and ink, is very much, it's so revealing, like revelatory of the thinking of our hand in engaging it. Huh. So it reveals, because it's so sensitive, it's ink on a plate, right? It's super sensitive. If you're forcing it, it's going to tell you you're forcing it. If you're, right, if you're not trusting the hand, it's going to be like, you didn't trust it right there, right? Yeah. So it's very revealing. It reveals where the ego state is, right? It's like, oh, it should look this way. And the ink looks at you and say, you think it should look this way, but right, it's not. That's not very good. It's not having that voice in it. It's not following itself. So it's very rigorous in that way. It seems simple, but it's super rigorous. And then we're starting to do things with machine collé here. Mm-hmm. We're printing on mulberry paper, machine mulberry. It's very thin, and doing ghost prints and then colorizing those with watercolors and sticking them all back together and have these beautiful glowy prints we're working on. My students are really interested in those processes. And then also that everyone who comes in to do monotypes, you end up making a bunch of them. And just the fact that you are making more and more images as a practice is inherently growth-based. It's inherently research and discovery. Like, you can't come in and make 5 monoprints and not discover something in that process of making them. Okay. Like, something is going to be revealed. So people do drawings that way, right? Artists do that. Like, I need to draw something, right, a bunch of times. One of the things monoprints offers is this wide stretching of distance from the print. You can work very precisely with your finger on the plate, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can work with brushes at a distance. And so that relationship with the activity of the medium on the plate, I don't know any other, aside from maybe painting, where you're offered that length and distance of interaction with the medium. So again, the medium inherently in this process creates a kind of relationship with the plate that is unique in my understanding of it. I think it can happen in etching, in the ground, in hard ground or soft ground it can happen. It's just the time it takes to get the image right is longer. I've done etching and dry points too, but monoprinting it's so revealing. I discover so much through doing. Every time I do monoprinting, I discover something. It's really, I think it's a wonderful practice. So we're bringing collagraphs into it now. Mm-hmm. We're attempting to do plywood size collagraphs on the. Yeah, we're working on technically getting that done. Right. We'll talk later about that, right? But yeah, we want to make big prints with collagraphs, and so we're working on some technical approaches to doing that with the equipment we have right now. And that practice may expand. And I want to offer at some point in the future an entire dry point, drawing dry point, monoprint dry point combinations. Like, they work really beautifully together. Dry points and monoprint processes, right? Sure. They work really well. So, and dry points are just wonderful and direct, and that's a great process.
Right. Recently, True and I were in St. Louis to talk to the fine people out there about a particular show at the St. Louis Art Museum that featured work from the collection of the Simmonses, Marianne and Ted Simmons. And they had several plywood-sized collograph prints on the wall by Jean Quick to See Smith.
I'm not familiar with that artist, but I will find out.
Well, I'll send you some pictures, because talk about making humble materials on a piece of plywood look like a glorious etching. I couldn't believe how she got them to work.
We've started to do some experimentation with it. Starting, because I'm not familiar with it, True gives us the big thumbs up in doing it, because it is more of a print process and it's reproducible.
Yeah.
You know, I want to bring color into these processes. I mean, this time we're talking like off topic here, but my biggest problem with people who come in to paint or use color is that they haven't come to terms with the relationship of color to drawing. I see it at college. I see it in grad students all the time using color arbitrarily for drawing. I'm like, color is purely relational. It exists almost separate as a relational thought, an emotional sound relation from drawing, right? Mm-hmm. And how do we begin to integrate drawing, monoprint, right, black and white drawing, and color within this practice here, within the thinking of the space? And so colorgraph, I think, may, within these tools in the space we have here, become where's the research tool in color?
Right.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if colographs could be a really good counterbalance to this very black and white, very drawing, very immediate practice of monoprinting with something that's reproducible and augmentable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As a process through colographs, because color monoprints are like squash paintings a little bit. You got to be really, really good to do a color monotype, you know, and not have it look like this. There's a book here that I even hate to open sometimes that's filled with color monoprints that just look like squash paintings, you know? Yeah. And I almost like show it to remind myself how bad they are, right? There's one or two people who do it well.
Yeah.
But out of this entire book,
oh gosh,
you know, Michael Mazer does really great stuff.
Right. The catalog is Singular Impressions, the Monotype in America by Joanne Moser, who was the curator for many years at the Smithsonian American Art Museum.
Yeah.
So I'll put a link in the show notes to this book.
Yeah, it's a really great book, but it's really problematic to do color monoprints. It takes a true master to do it. The black and white stuff is beautiful in there.
I love that the studio is helping artists grow. And it's not necessarily a painting studio or a print studio, but that everything is intertwined with each other. Yeah. And it's about thinking in process, assuming that people have the tools to execute, right? Mm-hmm. But that it's kind of not Shangri-La. It's, in my mind, I've always wanted.
It's unicorn fields.
It is. I mean, I've always wanted printmaking to, you know, get its due, because it always helps people reveal things, you know, about their other work and back and forth. Yeah. I'm thrilled you're doing it. So, if there are people listening who are interested in applying / getting in touch, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can go to centerartsandstudios.com.
Center Arts with an S and Studios with an S.
Yep, centerartsandstudios.com. And there's a whole contact thing in there. So there's contact information, there's a phone number, the programs are listed there. Yeah, contact me, come visit. I just had a visitor who saw us online, came to visit last night. It was really nice. Yeah, PhD student at Hopkins, but has an undergraduate in art and is looking for community while they're doing their program at Hopkins.
There you go.
Come visit, come see what we do, or take a class. Yeah. You know, we have all different levels, starting from memberships and going up to residencies. We have all different levels of approach of doing things here.
And it's pretty reasonable. I keep telling Dave he needs to raise his
Everyone
price,
says it's too reasonable.
It's too reasonable, so.
Yeah, you
have a nonprofit brain.
I know. It's I want to make it accessible as possible, you know, especially for...
Art shouldn't cost us.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of the, not to be political about it, but people with full-time jobs or children don't have time or often finances to go to graduate school or to take a month or 2 or 3 or 4 off to do a residency. It's just out of the question. And that's a really important group of people in the world who are artists, who are practicing, who are doing it, keeping the flame going. And where do they go? There's places you can go to get skills, right? You can learn how to do things. But for visual artists, working with images and the life of images and the life of objects, there's not a lot of places to go. That's why we're here. It's like to support that process.
Well done, Dave.
Thank you. Oh my God, this is so good to talk about. I love talking about art. I really do.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dave Cloutier, and I thank you for your support of Platemark. It's a labor of love, and I love doing it, but your support would be really helpful to keep the lights on in our studio, as my friend Miranda Metcalf says. Keep our lights on. Once again, over on platemarkpodcast.com, there is a support and donate button along the top menu bar. If you click it, you have two choices. If you click the button that says support with Anchor, that will give you an option to become a sustaining member at $5 a month. The other button that says buy me a coffee will allow you to make a one-time donation. It is set at $50, but there is a small button underneath that says change amount, so you can self-determine. Thanks to Dave Cloutier for being a willing subject today, and I'll thank you, as always, to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. In our next episode, stay tuned for a talk with James Sienna and Katia Santibanez. They are two of my favorite artists and love making prints both separately and together. So stay tuned for that. It'll be a great convo. We will see you next time.